My husband was sexually abusing our daughter. Here are some of the signs I noticed in her that led to me finding out. As we talk about this, I'll also tell you about common signs of sexual abuse that you can watch for in your own children, even if they aren't signs that I specifically saw in her. Number one, keeping secrets or just not talking as much as usual. I definitely started noticing my daughter keeping secrets from me, as if her shame was increasing with things that wouldn't normally have been shameful before. But also, she was getting quieter and quieter and quieter, and she was getting more and more reserved. Sign number two, not wanting to be left alone with certain people or seeming afraid of certain people. This is not a sign I saw in my daughter, but it is a sign that you should watch for in your own children. My daughter did not seem afraid of her father and didn't usually show signs of not wanting to be left alone with him. I do remember occasionally, if I was leaving for something that was more than a day, she did seem particularly clingy with me, but she didn't express a fear of being left alone with her father. Third, an increase in regressive behaviors or behaviors that just seem like they should be for younger kids. Thumb sucking, bed butting, things like that. This wasn't a common occurrence with her, but it did occur more than I thought it should at her age. And it did have me kind of going, everything okay? Next, overly compliant behavior. A lot of times people think that a child who's being abused is going to act out and cause a bunch of trouble. And that can happen sometimes, but a lot of times what you also get is someone who is overly compliant. And that absolutely described my daughter. She was so compliant and so worried about being compliant that it often left me questioning what made her think she needed to be so compliant. Spending an unusual amount of time alone can be a sign, particularly if it's a change in behavior. This is not something I noticed in my daughter, but it is something that you could watch for in your own child. Trying to avoid removing clothing to change or bathe. Again, this isn't something I specifically noticed in my daughter, but could be something you notice in your child. Illness or health issues that don't make sense. For example, my daughter had frequent stomach aches and headaches, but nothing really seemed to help that, and nothing that I could see externally seemed to trigger that. Other health issues you might notice is frequent UTIs. That is unfortunately a big sign that I noticed in her. I was taking her to her doctor multiple times. She was getting UTIs, she was getting kidney infections. We were running tests and doing ultrasounds on her bladder and everything, trying to figure out what was going on. I do remember asking her pediatrician one time, like, is there any way that this could be a sign of abuse? And her pediatrician said, it's not likely. It's more likely going to be an anatomical issue or something like that. And so we continued to look at that route. Unfortunately, in my daughter's case, it was a sign of abuse. This isn't something that should cause you to panic if you see it in your child, but it's certainly something that you should pay attention to. Sexual knowledge or behavior that is beyond the developmental stage that your child is in. This is definitely something that I noticed in my daughter. And what kills me is, just like everything else, there was an explanation for it. I mean, it didn't quite sit right with me, and it definitely was probably one of the biggest factors that led to me continuing to dig and dig and dig until I finally found the answer. But here's what happened. So, a few years before I figured out what was going on, my husband came upstairs and said to me, our children just saw porn on the TV. And I was like, what? And I called the cable company, furious, and they said that it had something to do with if you don't have the previews turned off on adult channels that are accessible through your package, then like those previews are still visible by anyone who flips through the channels. I had no idea that was a thing. Obviously, I told them, please turn them off right now. I don't want those on our TV. And I remember thinking, I was so worried that this would scar them, that they would remember this forever. They were so young. I mean, they were probably like 7, 8 years old. Fast forward to later, there were concerning things that were connected to sexual behaviors that really concerned me. My daughter was trying to access pornography on the computer. And when I asked her why, she said, oh, well, because of that video that we saw that one time. And then there was some concerning behavior. I think she and her brother and some neighbor kids had, like, all together, they had pulled down their pants to show each other their butts or something like that. And again, I'm like, well, what would make you think to do that? And again, they said, oh, well, maybe it was that video that we accidentally saw on the TV. So that continued to be kind of like the explanation for these things, but it was enough to make me go, oh, okay. But then also, I just felt like this isn't sitting right, you know? So there are also emotional things to watch for in your kids that can give you kind of a sign that things might be going on. Obviously, any big emotional changes where the child's emotions swing to something that you're not used to, or they seem particularly negative, they seem particularly withdrawn, they seem particularly full of shame or constantly anxious, worried, things like that. And yes, I absolutely saw that in her, and it continued to increase to the point where she seemed like she was constantly just so uptight, and she would only relax and loosen up around certain people. Self-harming behaviors can be another one. This is not something I noticed in my daughter, but it's something that you should watch for in your own kids as well. Another one is a change in eating habits. Not long before I found out what was going on, my daughter did kind of stop. I mean, she didn't stop eating, but she certainly started refusing food a lot. That was actually one of the biggest red flags to me that kind of made me say, okay, I'm not going to stop taking anymore because something's going on. She just kept on saying no to food, and that was strange for her. And one more to watch for is nightmares or fears of being alone at night. And yes, looking back, my daughter did experience these. She didn't tell me about nightmares very often, but she was very afraid to be left alone at night. What she said was she was afraid of somebody breaking into her bedroom and kidnapping her. That's what she repeated over and over and over again. She had heard of Elizabeth Smart, and she was obsessed with, like, oh my gosh, somebody was kidnapped from their own bedroom, and so she was constantly afraid that she was going to be kidnapped, taken from her bedroom. We had a big German Shepherd that we moved his crate into her room so that he could sleep there with her and she would feel better because she worried about that so much. Looking back, I think that was a sign, even though the explanation was kind of unrelated. Like, obviously, nobody was taking her from her bedroom and kidnapping her at night, but I think somehow those were probably connected. Somehow that insecurity being in her bedroom alone at night, things like that. But ultimately, here's what I cannot stress enough. Any changes, any sudden changes in your child's behavior that don't have an easy explanation, pay attention. Listen to your gut, and if something seems off, do not stop looking for the answer. Ultimately, that's my best explanation as to how I figured out what was going on with my daughter. I've made videos before where I said that my husband didn't show a lot of signs, or that I didn't notice anything in him. And then people have said, well, then what made you start asking that question? Because my daughter was starting to seem like something was wrong. I could tell that something wasn't right when it came to her. I just didn't know it was him at first. So that's the most important thing I can tell you is there's so many signs you can watch for in your children. And yes, it's good to know those. But also the biggest thing is watch for anything that seems like it's a sudden change, like it's not in character for your child, or anything in your gut that just tells you something's off here and I need to look and find that answer.